Hey there, sports psych enthusiasts. I'm Dr. Colin Fehr, and I want to share my passion with you. I love talking about ways to unleash the power of the mind. This recording is part of a larger lecture series I've created in an effort to make sports psychology concepts more accessible to a larger audience. The information contained in this series is especially well suited for students of sports psychology and is presented in a way that makes for easy listening for all. Welcome to Sports Psych Concepts.
Hey there, sports psych fans. Welcome to the Sports Psych Concepts lecture series. I'm Dr. Colin Fehr. Got the athlete burnout and how to prevent it as the topic for today. Athlete burnout is one of those terms and one of those phenomenon that we really need to have a good understanding of because it's real. It's a real thing. Athletes go through this and it can be a struggle to overcome. So we'll define it per usual, hit on some cause and effects, perhaps one of those important life principles, the principle of cause and effect. Touch on overtraining and differentiate that between psychological burnout, okay, and then of course address prevention, which is probably the best remedy here for this overall. And then if we do get caught with an athlete who's experiencing some burnout, what are some interventions we can use to help them dig out? So what is athlete burnout? Well, really it's one of those multidimensional constructs, right? It's a cognitive affective syndrome mostly. So usually defined or described by emotional and physical exhaustion. Okay, a reduced sense of accomplishment and sport devaluation. So athlete burnout, I'll tell you what it is not also. Okay, it's not depression and it's not necessarily just sport dropout. Okay, so there's a small percentage of athletes who experience this, 1 to 10%, depending, right, at some point in their career or their athletic experience, but there's not really a specific diagnostic criteria for this, and there's limited assessment to it. So how do we really know? How do we attach this to an athlete? Maybe they seem to be experiencing this, but there's not really a way we can concretely put that on there. Okay, so here's the three primary aspects though of burnout. So you have that emotional exhaustion, which is usually due to intense training and competition. They're just kind of burned out emotionally. They just don't have that much more to give. And so you may see them be emotionally more flat. Doesn't mean that they're depressed, right? It doesn't mean that couldn't be there also, but just more emotionally flat would be a way I would describe that, emotional exhaustion. Then there's this devaluation or depersonalization. So there's a loss of interest and maybe even some resentment toward their sport. Okay, but maybe you just see, I'm just not really feeling it. I'm feeling kind of burned out. And so they're not as interested in going out there and pushing. And then the last one is a reduced sense of accomplishment. So maybe they're achieving below their expectations or they're not meeting their personal targets. So those are the three primary things: emotional exhaustion, devaluation or depersonalization, and then reduced accomplishments. They're not achieving at the level that they were before. These may be some hallmark signs that an athlete you're working with may be experiencing burnout. So causes and effects. So the causes, I mean, really the effects, it's negative in many ways, right? But causes, it can be a lot of things. So I mean, it's a reaction to stress, chronic stress in particular, right? And we explain that within an overtraining, which is more like the physical side of things, which I'll get into more, and the psychosocial, psychological stress perspectives. Okay, so that could be a big cause. We've just been under stress for a long period of time, and we just feel the weight of the world coming down on us, and it's hard to continue to carry that. It's also a motivational phenomenon, so we can examine that within self-determination and entrapment frameworks. So again, if an athlete feels like they're trapped and they have low autonomy in particular, their self-determined motivation may be low, and So those can be a couple of the primary causes, right, that we'll see, especially chronically drawn out. Now, some of the negative effects, performance decrements, obviously I mentioned already, you'll see a decrease in motivation, maybe even some dropout or attrition. So a lot of athletes, they might quit their sport altogether related to burnout, and other burned out athletes may continue to play. Hey, they may continue to do it because there's some super seeding reason of why they need to continue. I'm burned out. I don't want to do this anymore, but I got to do it to keep my scholarship to finish school, right? You might see that in a college level athlete. And that is probably a real thing for a lot of college level athletes. Many college level athletes, they get to their senior year and they're feeling the burn big time, right? They're feeling burned out at that point, but they've got to continue and finish out to make sure that their school continues to get paid for if they're a scholarship athlete. We also may see troubled social relations that can negatively impact the team climate because they're just not as motivated to be there, they're under stress, and so they're not as nice to everybody, or they're just not as emotionally available because they just don't feel like they have that much left to give, and that can affect the social climate for sure. And it also can affect mental health, right? I'm sure it can affect physical health as well, always, but mental health, you have anxiety, depression, eating disorders. It can easily go into that level of stress or context, right? To where it's maybe we wouldn't categorize it by itself as its own mental health situation, but there's undertones there, and it easily can drop over the edge of the cliff there on the mental health side. And as I said, physical health, that can be affected by the mental health things. There may be increased illness susceptibility or substance abuse, so it can go in either direction. Now, I want to differentiate burnout from overtraining. They're not necessarily the same thing. Okay, they can co-occur simultaneously, but they're not the same thing. So overtraining, I like to think of this one as like overcooking. So there's an optimal time and temperature in the oven to get your dinner just right. And the same holds true for training. So if we overdo our training and we don't allow adequate recovery, then it's like we burned our dinner. Okay, so it's like you have this time and duration and intensity component of physical training, and the same is like cooking, right? We have the same amount of time and the right temperature, and if we overdo it, then it can be not so great. So if we burn the dinner bad enough, it's like it's unrecoverable, and that's when it becomes overtraining syndrome, where it takes a long time to recover. Okay, so overtraining really is this imbalance between training and recovery. It's under recovery is a term that you hear sometimes used interchangeably with that, and it's usually in combination with training and non-training stressors. So this is different than overreaching, which you want to have in sport participation. Athletes need to go and push beyond themselves to where maybe they feel exhausted and you're stressing their ability to recover. But then as long as you allow that time to recover and they get the nutritional needs met as well, then they're gonna be okay, right? You overreached where they were currently able to perform at and recover, and then you create the space for them to recover, and then they adapt just fine. Okay, so you do that too often and you don't have enough recovery, that's when it becomes the overtraining syndrome. So recovery is a key part of this. So it's very important when we're having a discussion about athlete burnout, because sometimes these are used interchangeably, but we're talking about psychological burnout. That's the differentiation here. So you might hear overtraining and burnout, and how do we distinguish between those two? That's how we're making the distinction. How do we prevent athlete burnout then, right? A few different things that we consider. The first would be to conduct an assessment. And like I said, there's limited resources out there available for this, but we're looking in those three primary areas. So the reduced emotional intensity, perhaps, because there's just not as much there to offer. The devaluation or depersonalization, just like, I'm not that interested in this anymore. Tied into motivational pieces, we can kind of get a good sense or read of that. And then the reduced accomplishments, reduced performance, right? Decrements there. So we can kind of do an assessment there to determine maybe if we're feeling that that's what's going on. Usually it's one of those things that we can see it. We know it when we see it. We need to understand stress. Okay, so I've described stress previously, but you've got this balancing act between the demands placed on us by the environment and then our capabilities to meet those demands and our perception of that. So stressors can be really high in the sporting context. We got competition, high training demands, a time requirement, right? Pressure from coaches and teammates. We may have family dynamics that surround sport, and then we have this own internal pressures. And so we want to, if we want to prevent burnout, because we know all those things are there, we got to, we can't necessarily just lower the sport-based demands. Okay, we can't decrease like, well, we got to do this. This is what it takes to be at the level that we need to be. So it's like we can't really reduce those per se. And so we focus on the other side, like, well, let's increase resources that are available, right? Whether that's socially or we get them access to a sports psych consultant, right, or even a mental health counselor, anybody who can help them. We want to increase those resources, and that can be a big part of this. We also want to foster motivation continually. So it's not just like, you can't just assume that your athletes are going to have motivation and come in there. So usually they are at the beginning of the season, they are going to, but then as it wears on, that's when you're usually going to see athlete burnout at the beginning of the season. That's not going to be a good situation, but maybe more toward the second half of the season that might start creeping in. So we need to foster motivation. So there's some different platforms we can use to do that, or theoretical perspectives. Self-determination theory is a good one because, of course, psychological outcomes are influenced by motivation, and we have individual choice that we can emphasize compared to those internal or external pressures. And the three basic needs of self-determination theory: autonomy, competence, relatedness. These are things that we can focus on specifically. It's one of the great things about this framework is, okay, well, I want to make sure that I cultivate feelings of personal choice or a sense of control. That's autonomy, where athletes are going to feel more motivated if they feel like they have a sense of control in what it is that's happening to them. And I also want them to feel a sense of success and being effective in what it is that they're doing, and that's the competence need that's being met. And then relatedness, social connection, right? That need to belong, feeling like we're accepted. So if we structure, based on this theory, if we structure sport to support satisfaction of those three basic needs, then we're going to increase that self-determined motivation and hopefully prevent athlete burnout. Okay, and so this sport entrapment idea is kind of tied into this as well, where someone links their identity with these social forces, and burnout can occur when they feel trapped in the role of being an athlete. Okay, so they maintain their involvement because they have to, right? They have to, and so there's not really much autonomy in that. They don't have a sense of choice or control. Okay, so we need to identify, or we need to acknowledge their identity and those social forces that play a role right there. So we have to consider, or athlete burnout itself, we got to consider it within the sport structures that contribute to the occurrence of athlete burnout, and that includes their identity and these other social forces. We should cultivate engagement to prevent athlete burnout. So we want to help athletes experience engagement on lots of different levels with the workload itself, having a sense of autonomy or control. What are the reward structures or systems that are in place? Developing a sense of community, identifying shared values. Because engagement itself, it's this really positive psychological experience. We love to feel engaged in things that we're doing, and there can be this confidence that we feel as compared to a reduced sense of accomplishment, because we're engaged and we're doing things, and so generally we're going to accomplish more things and things that we're engaged in, and we feel dedicated. Compare that to like devaluing or depersonalizing what it is that we're doing. And there's more emotional intensity, vigor, and enthusiasm compared to feeling exhausted on the other end. So engagement really can help prevent burnout and enhance motivation, our performance, our satisfaction, and our well-being. Now, of course, prevention is going to be the best tool that we have. We don't want athletes to get to this point, but sometimes they get there, right? There's just the weight of the world and the different things, or maybe we weren't as aware as we needed to be, and so athletes do experience some burnout. So what are some things that we can do if they get to that point? And just some general ideas first is that whatever it is that we do, it needs to be multifaceted. So there should be a physical component, a psychological component, a social component. We need to address more aspects of the person, okay? And we need to look at a range of different antecedents, these things that precede the burnout that they're experiencing. So it could be overtraining. It could be that side of things. It could be the psychosocial sport stress or environment. It could be feelings of sport entrapment, so their identity is tied into that, right? Or maybe it's motivational with self-determination theory that we use to meet those three basic needs. So we need to look at it from multiple directions, and it's a highly individualized phenomenon, athlete burnout is. So we need to be aware of that and bring that in. Okay, well, I had an athlete once who had burnout, and this is what we did, and it helped them. Like, so, oh, you got to take the individual into consideration. And ultimately, again, the most effective interventions will have a prevention focus. So we need to be proactive on this rather than reactive, right? The classic way to explain things. But some more specific interventions, right, is connect them, help them reconnect with their anchor point, with their why, okay? Reevaluate that. What's the underarching purpose? And so when I've spoken with some athletes who maybe experienced some burnout, and I go to this level, I mean, that's almost always they go back to like childhood memories that they had of participating in sport. It's like, I do this because it's fun. Like, I enjoy it. Like, that's really why I do this. But man, it hasn't been very fun lately. And so reconnecting with that, even on that, like, yeah, go back in the past and say, yeah, like I actually do enjoy this. That can be powerful to reinvigorate them. So try and connect with their anchor point. Emphasize rest and recovery. So sleep, nutrition, hydration, those sorts of things are going to be big here for an athlete, because again, they are going to be training really hard if they get to this point. Maybe they're not like to the definition overtraining, but they can co-occur. So that's something that we could emphasize. We need some rest. And maybe it's even a mid-season break. Like, okay, we're going to give you a week off, a week away. Don't come around. You just like go do your own thing that's going to help you feel recovered. So that could be a more drastic measure, but it may be warranted. We also can emphasize outside activities. Okay, so if it's like, if this is the one thing that you do and you're not doing these other things that provide joy and satisfaction in your life, man, you're putting a lot of weight on that one thing that we're doing. So we need to make space for that, or encourage that athletes be well-rounded and have these other interests. And sometimes coaches are like, no, like, you don't go be doing these other things. Like, this is the one thing that you got to do. And I understand that from, the standpoint of maybe you're an athlete and you want to go on the ski hill 5 days a week, well, let's just say you're going on the weekends during basketball season in the winter, and there's a risk of injury. You blow your knee out with that, but like, there's a risk of injury for a lot of things that you do. So it's hard to balance that. But outside activity should be encouraged in general to bring joy and satisfaction in ways that are different than just the sport. We should also include variety in the training, so it doesn't feel monotonous. It doesn't feel like it's just the same. That can help cultivate motivation. And of course, it can make things more fun. And so I've done this with athletes in the past. Try and mix up the practices so they're different, but then incorporate some fun factor. All right. Once every 2 weeks, it's an athlete planned practice, and it's got to have some element of fun and silliness to it. And that's what we're doing. And so you build that in. And I had one athlete who was on the verge of burnout, and she smirked a smile in that practice. This is just what I need. I need to do. We did a scavenger hunt or something like that, and it really can go a long ways. We also should focus on or seek some social support. Use this, right? Find some people who can help and prop us up. That can be family outside. It can be a sports psych consultant, right? Go get somebody who you can talk to that can help. Of course, it's kind of an obvious one. And then lastly, we should emphasize the process over the outcome. So if we get caught up in these big demands of what it is that okay, we're going to win the conference championship, and so that's just like the only thing that ever gets emphasized, and that can be this mounting pressure as we get closer and closer to that. And if we focus on the process, then it's just like day to day, it's what's right in front of us. Okay, it doesn't seem so daunting. So a lot of different interventions there that can be helpful for athletes who are going through this. Like I said, multifaceted, multidimensional, consider all these different angles and individualize it for it to be most effective. So with that, we made it through. Just to review, we talked about athlete burnout, defined it, some different causes and effects, right? You have those 3 different primary levels there with the decreased emotional intensity. There's that part of it, the devaluation, depersonalization, and then the sense of accomplishment or achievements may go down, performance. Differentiating that between athlete burnout and overtraining is important to understand. Prevention is the best medicine, but if they do tip over the edge, there are some interventions and things that we can do to help them out. So hopefully this information was helpful for you and you have a way to go and apply it in your profession. I appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to this recording in the Sports Psych Lecture Series. I hope you learned something. More importantly, I hope you learned something that you can apply in your life. Feel free to share this presentation with others who might be interested. And if you're interested in more content like this, visit the Fehr Advantage channel on YouTube, or find the Fehr Advantage podcast on Spotify, or visit my website at fehradvantage.com.